Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Associate Professor of Communication at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on X at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. And here we are, once again, for the 9th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review with my guest and co-host today, Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten, Vice Dean of Research at the Faculty of Humanities and Theology at Lund University. Dr. Dutceac Segesten, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I have a long title. Every year I add some other things, so I can follow my progression over the decades.
Indeed, by charting backwards.
Yeah.
So for those listeners who may be new to the podcast, this is an annual event where we reflect on the year that has passed in terms of social media and politics, and also do so in a bit less structured format, so more of an open conversation. And I think every year, it's always, we start out by thinking, what are we going to talk about? There's not really that much that happened this year. And then when you start digging into the headlines and looking more into, the year in review, it turns out that there actually has been quite a lot that's happened this year.
Indeed. And we're trying to limit ourselves to only 2 gifts in the spirit of Christmas to the Social Media and Politics podcast's public. So we'll try to keep it shorter this time, even though the conversations are lively and rich, and that can prolong slightly the duration of this particular episode.
We can't do the 3 hours that has happened in the past. But so instead of having 3 gifts each, we have 2 gifts that we will unwrap for you, the listener. And let's start with the first gift.
Well, you are always introducing us to the overview of the social media platforms, a variety of them, and their year in review reports.
That's right.
If I remember, though, over the years, the number of these reports has been dwindling, and fewer of these companies turn out with some form of stats regarding the overall activity on their platforms, and even much less about the politics that's been active on their platforms. How is it this year?
Indeed. So when we started doing this, it would be, in the glory days of Twitter and Facebook, and it would be top, tweeted politicians, blah, blah, blah. Yes, so even though there are more platforms, there is less focus on explicitly politics, I think also in this 2024 major election year. But nevertheless, I have gone through and tried to find as many of these reports as I can. There are some, but I can forewarn the listeners that not so much politics to be discussed this year. So I think this will actually go not as long as in previous years, but without further ado, let's hop right into it. And as is customary, the first platform that we'll discuss is the state of the podcast, social media and politics. So this year, this will be the 11th episode, believe it or not. That's one shy of my goal of 12 per year. Over the year, there has been 14,000 downloads, which is nice. And the audience, it's very hard to get a sense of how many people tune in. But it seems like when there haven't been so many episodes being put out, it's about 500, and then it can get up to about 1,000 when the pod is more active. So definitely has been sporadic on the podcast releases, and that's just due to increased responsibilities at the universities. A lot of teaching, a lot of things I just had to get done this year. But one thing I did want to bring up is, and there won't be any sort of major changes to the podcast in the short term, but I'm thinking it may be entering a sort of twilight period where...
Well, there needs to be at least a 10-year anniversary year in review. So 2025.
That is right. There absolutely must be a 10th annual year in review, which would bring me to 10 years of doing this podcast.
Which is incredible.
And my goal is to get to 200 episodes at least. So that will take a year or two to do. But I think 10 years, 200 episodes, maybe that's a good kind of natural point to not stop podcasting entirely, but I don't know. I haven't really decided yet. Maybe just do a couple a year, kind of keep this thing going, maybe do a different podcast entirely. But as we've talked about in the year in review, there does seem to be a sort of slowing down on the social media research front, or perhaps maybe this is too niche now, or it's not. When I started this, it was just a couple of platforms, and now we have this massive fragmentation. So it's, I don't know.
I'm thinking that the name of the podcast, Social Media and Politics, may be too narrow for the circumstances in which we are finding ourselves in the sense that social media has become, in a sense, embedded into so many other things. It's very difficult to isolate it. So maybe potential listeners of the podcast don't feel that they should listen to it because of the name, even though the content probably is very relevant to their work. So I'm not sure that I see it's kind of, reduced intensity, but maybe a rebranding or reorientation in terms of the public that it targets.
So I don't think I'll stop podcasting in general, but it's just harder to keep a steady release schedule. But I think it was this year, so I'll bring this up now, is that when it comes to social media research, I mean, we've really been hit hard by the data lockouts.
And this is going to be, I think, a through line for today's episode in various guises.
And so I've seen in a couple, proposals and grant applications that I've evaluated, people promising to do more social media research. And what they tried to say is that the Digital Services Act, the DSA, will magically allow data to be...
And this is something specifically for the European Union, not something that is valid worldwide. Also, it's kind of a niche legislation for only the European Union-based scholars.
That's a good point. And I do know that, and at least as of a few months ago, academics were getting to the stage where they're really starting to craft what that policy would look like. Like, what is the exact wording of what platforms will be required to release to researchers? But I think it was this year, I had the opportunity to demo Facebook's new data stream, their Fort service. And long story short, there is a way that platforms can offer access to data, but in a very, very limited way. And it's very hard to get an overview of your data. So I do think that we're going to be entering an environment where, yes, these platforms will follow the law and allow researchers access to data, but not in the way that we had before, and not in a very useful way, I would say. So just to signal that it's been tough to find, that new exciting research on the social media front. I mean, most of that I've seen is like misinformation, inoculation, and stuff like that. And I don't want this to be a misinformation podcast. So that's also part of the reason why the episodes have been a bit sporadic this year.
I think, though, social media has become, as I said before, integrated into all sorts of other media. It's very difficult to differentiate social media from regular traditional media. It's been also increasingly used by pretty much everyone that's in organized fashion. It could be companies, it could be political parties, it could be states, it could be state institutions, regions, but fewer and fewer individuals that are actually producing this famous user-generated content that used to be the defining feature of social media in the old days of the beginning of the pod. So I think we are at the confluence of a variety of changes in this environment where the pod originally started. And we who studied social media for all these years as well, and people before us just as much, probably need to account for how we can come to terms with accessing the data, studying the social behavior of people that we wanted to capture through the social media intermediary, but also the way social media alters this behavior. So not only just capturing the trace data that people leave behind, but also, in a sense, the thing that precedes them leaving a trace. For example, the fact that a lot of individuals do not contribute with content, and it's become very institutionalized and very formalized in a sense.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say that I think because of those reasons, and also just because of, the process of developing as a human, since I started the podcast, I think I've been thinking a lot and reflecting a lot about pivoting to something new. I mean, of course, social media will be a part of that, but also I think I'm just ready to switch into a different gear.
Do you have any hints on what this new you will be doing?
Let's see. As you know, there has been a very large grant application put out this year, and yeah, pivoting into something a little bit bigger than just social media. So
let's hope that we'll have the privilege of seeing what that happens. And I just wanted to say, I think this Social Media and Politics podcast, beyond the place that I, very minor played in it, has really been a great service to our political communication community of scholars and practitioners. And in a sense, we're very grateful for it existing, and the fact that it has all these numbers that you just recently reported simply are a testimony of how useful this has been for so many of us. So
thank you for that.
Good job.
Thank you for that. And again, no major changes coming soon. Every now and then I get a nice email from a student somewhere in the world saying that they found it useful. So that is always, makes my year. All right, let's hop into the platform stats. So years in review. So first one up is Meta. We actually do have something from Meta this year, appropriately entitled What We Saw on Our Platforms During 2024's Global Elections.
Excellent.
By who other than Nick Clegg, who's vice president of former deputy prime minister of the UK. So this report was really actually, despite being about politics, a bit of a nothing burger, I would say. Not much happening. It talked about how they really have a mission to protect voice. And voice, kind of interesting if you look at their community guidelines, voice is their kind of driving policy to enable the expression of users. But voice can conflict with things like their values on safety, right? You can't have calls for violence because then these things conflict. And there's also a number of exceptions to when people break their policies, such as when the platform or moderators or oversight board, for example, decides that something is newsworthy, that needs to be in the public interest. So it's a very complicated, again, these platforms are super hard with what they have to deal with in terms of moderation. But what did they talk about in this report? They talked about this move towards self-selecting into political content, where you now have to essentially turn on that you want to be shown political content from accounts that you don't already follow. So that is already in place in the US, but it's being rolled out globally. So they talked a little bit about that. They talked about what they're doing in terms of election integrity, hate speech, and civil unrest. So I think that's what we can take away from this report, that's what they're thinking is important. That's the
content they had to face, basically.
Exactly. So they clarified that Meta across their platforms allows people to raise concerns about election processes, but not when connected to political violence. So, of course, getting into this election skepticism. But ads that call into question the legitimacy of elections are blocked. They've taken a firm stance on that. Hate speech, they do yearly audits of words that are designated as slurs, because, of course, language changes, and I guess also people try to develop new internet-only slurs to get around their...
Like a different code speak.
Exactly, different emojis. I think they have a term for this called algo speak, is how it's discussed in the literature. So they're reviewing those, and they are prioritizing looking at slurs in what they call markets with current elections. So we covered election integrity, hate speech, and then they also have a point on civil unrest, where they have updated penalties related to public figures that are suspended during periods of civil unrest.
Is that a hint on Trump?
I think it's all, it's very US centric, right? I think this is all about questioning elections. Yes, definitely January 6th, but also when we see those kind of copycat events in Brazil, for example. So just interesting that they actually did put out a kind of, it's not necessarily a year in review, but...
Do they even present data? Like how many of these civil unrest related events they have, or any kind of substantiated evidence for what they did to avoid bad politics?
There are some hard figures, and we'll come to those in a second. But as far as I remember from the report, no, it was just kind of a blog post. They also stressed that they continued their voter information programs to vote. So, what that is that when you log into Facebook, you'll get a reminder that it's do you vote? You can think of the famous Bond studies that had that kind of varied message when they worked with Facebook's civic engagement team. I'm sure they're still running experiments on that. And they really stressed that they are upping those programs in the UK, EU, India, Brazil, and France. So large,
France specifically.
yeah, large democracies with elections this year, and also very controversial ones, right? Ones with major implications for political violence. So they also upped their providing links to official sources when people search on the platform related to the 2024 elections, assuming that's U.S. But yeah, so
it could be across, like probably links to the official electoral authority in that country.
So again, a little bit interesting to see what they're writing about, but also kind of yeah, not so interesting. I think that's I didn't really. I feel like this was a reminder of things, but not so much anything revolutionary. What is interesting is impact of AI.
They have a special rubric for that.
And that was also a big story this year, right? How much would AI, factor into these various elections? And I think across the board, the answer is not much.
Not yet.
And that's also what they said in the report. Basically, they found a very low volume of AI disinformation. It was less than 1% of all misinformation that they fact-checked. So where we did get some numbers is on coordinated inauthentic behavior, CIB, where here they report since 2017, where basically they find Russia is the number one coordinated inauthentic behavior source, followed by Iran and China. But thinking that it's 6-7 years since they've been doing this, they've taken down 39 networks in Russia and 11 in China. So it's not a huge number of things that they are busting. Interesting that most audiences are inauthentic and inflated, and that basically what it seems is that they find these networks, they take them down, but they don't really have an impact because they're just
regrouping elsewhere.
They're inflating their own numbers with their own kind of bots or whatever. But interestingly, I think the most interesting part of this report is when they talked about that these inauthentic operations have a very cross-platform strategy where they create like their own fake websites, and they create their presences across multiple channels, which essentially means they are leveraging the fragmentation so that if they get shut down on Facebook, they still have online channels. So it's not like if Meta busts, the network on their platforms, like that doesn't stop it. They're also present. So they seem very sophisticated in being online, and the analogy that people use is it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? you take down one head and 3 more pop up, like Hydra, whatever. That seems to be the case with.
I think it's interesting. Basically, we learn. We as humans learn, and the companies that produce bot farms and regimes that sponsor this kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior, they also learn, and they can also guess the algorithm, maybe reverse engineer the algorithm, and try to predict what the algorithm would do and what the behavior of the company, Meta in this case, would be towards them. And I think also the fragmentation of social media that you already noted lends itself well to this either, hiding places on the internet, as well as we will see probably in what I'm going to talk about in my first gift, this kind of interlaced networks across platforms, but not reproducing the functions from one platform to another, more like specializing platforms for various purposes, belonging to these features that each platform provides. Meta is more regulated. Meta allows political ads in a certain way, whereas let's say TikTok or Telegram or X would do it in their own different way. And I think what we see is a learning process, which is normal to see after almost a decade of digital advertising in this space, where different actors utilize the features of each particular architecture of each platform in their best way, most strategic way.
Totally. So I wanted to spend some time on that one because it's Meta, it's the big whale, and they did have a report.
They do not separate by their different platforms. So they talk about these as one
As
product.
one, yeah. And I was I have it in my notes here that I was surprised they didn't mention Instagram, which is just this behemoth, which, yeah. I have a number of other ones to run through, but again, it's going to be quite short because there's not...
We can do a comment at the end of this session of wrap-ups.
So we still have TikTok, Snap, Pinterest, Google, Twitch, and Pornhub, everyone's favorite, or at least mine.
Yeah. So they do release at least their numbers, right?
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff with Trump speeches and Pornhub. But before we get there, let's go to TikTok. Year on TikTok 2024. Their sort of slogan was, "A little creativity sparks a lot of impact." And
so cute.
They talked about the shared language of video, but it was really just shown through this report that this is a marketing technique for them. They talked about the economic incentives of being a creator. So like creator X made, dollar amount Y doing a single TikTok live.
Wow.
So they also talked about book talk, which you talked about in one
Yeah.
of our prior year reviews. But again, tying this to sales. So it was really about look what you can make on this platform if you
Very lucrative focus, which I
So-
guess what drives creators to that
a
platform.
little creativity sparks a lot of impact was the tagline. I think the bottom line was that if you put in a little creativity, you can make a lot of money, is the idea. So they mentioned that they were the cultural epicenter of the internet.
Ooh, that is a big title.
Fueling-
The cultural epicenter. I have to say this. Wow, the
Yeah.
cultural epicenter of the internet.
And I think they have a point, right? They fueled trends like Brat Summer, which comes up in other year in reviews. But they also talked about how they add new terms to our cultural lexicon. And I do think that they do. So Brat Summer just being one example.
Which had the political reverberations as well. It's not just a cultural trend outside politics.
So there was lots of stuff about music and artists and sports, again, with this kind of promo focus about how this musician used this platform and blew up. Kind of interesting, there was a focus on education by highlighting museums and things that they were doing.
Museums.
And posts with the hashtag science increased 45%. So something interesting for us as educators. But yeah, nothing burger in terms of politics.
Do you know if the audience of TikTok is continuing to grow?
Not 100% sure. With so many of these year in reviews, I'm just kind of pulling in what is interesting to
I have a feeling that I
summarize.
read somewhere, again, this is maybe not something that I had prepared, but my feeling is that it's still growing across the world. So they still feel like they have momentum.
Yeah, for sure. I think between TikTok and Instagram, that's really where it's at these days. Snap, 2024 in a snap. That was their,
Well,
that was their
fittingly.
title. So they have a big focus on AR lenses. That's kind of their, they're a camera or lens company, not so much a social media platform. But they talked about how when you use lenses, you get a sort of 5 times engagement boost relative to other social media posts. So what is the AR lenses that they're putting forward? Trying on makeup, fashion through Bitmojis are still around. There was a focus on music, and again, the idea of Brat was mentioned, and movies and food, but nothing in terms of politics there.
Interesting. There used to be the days, now that we are reminiscing on the good old days of social media, that politicians would create filters which would enable them to reach the younger populations on Snap, or would kind of tune in to various cultural trends equivalent to Brat Summer to reach out. But it doesn't seem that they're using Snapchat as much as it was the case back in the 2016 days.
But it surprisingly chugs along. It really does. I think it also has a quite vibrant user base in certain parts of the world. So Reddit, the Reddit recap is no more.
Why?
They are closing the recap.
And why? Do they give you an argument?
No, I think it's maybe it was, I don't remember exactly what the post said, but of course you have your personal recap.
Yeah.
And it will give you it gives you a banana for every post you've scrolled through and every comment. So people end up like saying, I have 60,000 bananas, which means I spent a lot of time on the platform. But that's unfortunate because Reddit used to give very, very detailed.
Yeah.
But I guess that was probably something from the community, from the R recap subreddit. And those moderators just decided not to do it anymore. Maybe also there's been the whole protest thing about the company going public. So Reddit recap is dead. Pinterest predicts, though.
Yes.
Which never has anything political, but is fun to talk about. So if you're new or if you haven't been paying attention to Pinterest predicts, and why would you? This one is interesting because what they do is they monitor searches on their platform to aggregate this into a set of predictions that they go back and check the following year. So I tried to see how many did they get right last year, and I couldn't find that. But basically,
was it something with mermaids?
There's all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah. And so I'll give you some examples of the themes. But over the last 5 years, 80% of their predictions have come true.
Ooh, that's good.
I tried to find out what coming true means in this sense, but yeah. Anyways, so these were things. They always have cool. I definitely recommend. In the episode description, there'll be all the links to these reports. Definitely check out Pinterest Predicts. It's fun. Not number one. Number one I have here is cherry coated.
Cherry coated.
That cherry color and flavors are on an uptick. People are searching for that now, so it should come true in 2025. Rococo Revival. So
wow, Rococo, the style.
The style, which is they describe as opulent and feminine.
Ooh.
This kind of new Baroque. There's which I'm all for. I love Rococo stuff, furniture, and everything. So that's on the up.
Cool. Let's see if that comes through. So a maximalist style, basically.
Yeah, or...
Oh, the Scandinavian IKEA cues are gonna be gone. I'm surprised.
But I think that's why they do this, because if you're an IKEA manager, you would maybe then, they very much try to partner you with their sales team after you read this. And then one that I also liked was Castle Core. Gothic-inspired home decor.
Yay!
Which is very much my apartment where we're recording now. So I guess I was ahead of the curve on Castle Core.
I like this. Actually, it's very interesting. I have a little of a comment about Pinterest. Both you and I were this summer at a workshop or small conference in Germany when we were looking at various companies and their terms and conditions, social media companies. And I had a little bit of a revelation, is too much said, but like a moment where I wondered if Pinterest really is a social media company. And this is maybe too deep for the year in review, but I just wanted to put it there in terms of thinking, what do we study, right? Beyond even politics. But there is not so much of an engagement in terms of sociability with Pinterest. Of course, the functionalities are there, and I think it's a very interesting discussion about these so-called affordances, right? Pinterest affords you to leave a comment to the creator of a pin. But in my use, which is not extensive, but I guess it's somewhere around the average, I'd suppose, I have not seen more than 3 or 4 comments left to any particular picture that was appended or put into a board, right? So I'm not sure that Pinterest really is a true social media company or provides the sociability that we expect from a social media company, because it doesn't provide this interaction between users. Of course, it's a digital archive or a mood board holder. Yeah, you want to call that. But I'm not sure that sociability is the thing that they're looking for. Today, we have some other platforms for providing this, like Canva, for example, or Miro, I don't know how you pronounce that one, which provide the same idea that you can collect pictures from the internet and you create your own mood boards, connecting various, templates and so on. So I'm not sure that Pinterest really provides a sociability aspect, but again, they are seen as a social media company. They see themselves probably as a social media company, and so we are reporting about them. But personally, I'm not entirely sure that they do fulfill the criterion of becoming the minimum sociability criterion to be social.
I think you could break it down. I mean, it's not designed to support interactivity, but I think it's definitely a social media, if we take this idea that all media is social.
Yeah,
right?
well...
So it has its own thing going. I think it's definitely more market brand oriented. They've done a very good job staying out of the political crossfire.
Exactly.
They did have some stuff with vaccine misinformation, and so you can think it's very female oriented, and so I think a lot of those feminine discourses that were anti-vax around protecting, future pregnancies and children and stuff was somehow there, but they've missed the big partisan politics, kind of formal participation fight. But I agree, it's a different model, and it's curious. I also don't know so much about it.
You don't have a mood board on Pinterest?
I don't have a mood board.
Oh God! Because you're a guy.
The extent of my Pinterest use is clicking on a picture that I'm trying to use on like a PowerPoint slide and log into Pinterest to access.
Be able to locate where is that from.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it's interesting. It's interesting to see also the evolution of sociability, which is probably really what I was trying to say before, that people don't post so much, people don't interact so much, but they consume a lot, right? Yeah. So we see this power law again much more clearly than in the golden days of social media, in which we have a few influencers that are both persons but also companies, right? And they end up producing more than 80% of the content that's out there on Pinterest as well as anywhere else, and having companies either pitch in and try to have a presence there, or tune in to the trends that these influencers would, or content creators would generate?
Yeah, I mean, we come at this from what's political about these platforms. They are all private companies driven by profit, right?
Yeah.
You can't forget that. So Pinterest is doing what it does on that side.
Anyway, moving on.
Twitch. Annual recap. So they have a report, absolutely nothing related to politics. We talked in the...
Can you name what Twitch is? I don't think a lot of people know about it anymore.
I don't know if I'm the right person to... I mean, it's a streaming platform very tied up with gaming. So there was a lot about Grand Theft Auto 5 was a big release this year, and so that was the most hours watched in terms of the game. They also stressed that people are using the platform, I want to say about 9 to 10%, just to hang out. So
the social, apropos the earlier comment that I made.
And also something I know that from former students, that they also like hang out on Discord and then like watch movies together, but are logged in the Discord. So like, yeah, there is this kind of sociability that maybe isn't necessarily how the platform was designed, but yeah.
How people use it.
So there was a little bit about the Olympics, which happened this year.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to that. There was a lot of Olympics talk and...
The media event, right?
Mm-hmm. A lot of chill. They emphasize that for relaxing and quote-unquote calm gaming, which I guess is different from like competitive esports type gaming. And a bit about ADHD. And that's all I have in my notes. But...
no politics.
No politics. And
even though it used to be quite a place exactly for chill conversations. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, had a Twitch chat with the vice president, how do you pronounce his name?
Waltz.
And they were playing computer games together, and that was maybe the highlight of the political side of Twitch.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's political stuff happening. There's going to be first adopters. There's going to be untapped potential, as we talked about in the last episode. Like Twitch is huge for reaching young male gamers, right? But I mean,
which was the point of them being there, I
in
guess.
terms of what they are saying in their year in review reports, it's very much apolitical. So that brings us to Google, year in search. Every year they do the video.
Yes.
This one I have to say was pretty lame. But
people did not do anything exciting.
They always do this. They have a keyword, like it was I think last year, heroes.
Yeah.
So this year it was breakout.
Ooh.
But it wasn't very explicit as to what breakout means.
AI?
No. It was like they showed a lot of like sports performances, country music. Something with pickles and soft drinks, which I know has been some trend going around. Olympics, lots of Olympics. Breaking out, But they also have their trending searches, like globally. And so there was a lot of soccer, which is always there. Not so much cricket, which is usually top because of India.
Even though India and Pakistan have a big debate or... almost conflict around this. But maybe it's not reflected yet because it came late.
Yeah, globally, I want to say that it was a lot of U.S. election searches with people like Donald Trump, Harris, Biden, alongside Princess Catherine. And I'm going to get this name wrong, but Amane Khalif, who was the boxer with the controversy around gender.
Yes.
So that person made it into top searched individuals globally. So there was a little bit of politics in that, and so that's also something we could dive into. Again, not so much the formal party politics, but the culture war, which we've also talked about year in review. So that was Google, year in search. Yeah, breakout, but it was very sort of vague, I found.
Nothing about India? Like they didn't make it, none of the politics of India, because India is such a major country and they are very connected to the internet. Maybe the Indians have moved to Bing. No reports from Bing.
No, but finally, the crown jewel, Pornhub, 2024 year in review, which for those
They're still very transparent, right?
Are tuning in for the first time, they have an absolutely excellent data team that puts out really interesting reports around big events, but also searches. And so this year, their sort of theme was demure desires.
Demure? So Pornhub? What is this?
The idea of mindful pleasures and essentially simplicity. which I think is tied to a few years ago, if it wasn't not last year, the year before, it was about people searching, it was like the year of the amateur.
Yeah.
People don't want professional
like
stuff.
homemade videos.
So here it's like amateur, but even more like every day. So they have the Sexual Wellness Center, which is another strategic thing by Pornhub to have a sort of, people aren't worried or people are getting addicted to porn, right? So they have a psychologist who is saying that it seems people may be pining for a simpler time, looking for things that are less complicated, maybe seeking out more meaningful experiences.
Oh.
So it gets this idea of mundane media use, right? Like there's something to, when people get so hyper stimulated, maybe they go for something more low key.
Which I think is a longing to some extent for this user-generated content that defined social media in 2014, 2015, 16, where people unbelievably, with today's eyes, were posting their lunch. Instagram, I recall actually this particular trend that you could post your lunch. Nobody ever would post their lunch today.
No.
It's completely uninteresting, right?
Or they do it as a story.
Or they do it in a proper setup in a fancy restaurant. It's like, here I am
My
eating
2-star Michelin lunch.
Yeah. More of a positioning rather than actually talking about lunch. And I think maybe there is this part of the public that is longing, as you were saying, about something simpler, something that is come across not so unattainable too. A lot of these influencers come across, regardless if they are, Mormon wives or if they are, Parisian stylists, they also come across as unattainable, not relatable. They're aspirational, but not real, right? So I think perhaps this Pornhub trend can translate into this longing for simplicity and also more like, I can do this type of spirit.
Yeah. Again, I think the reason that I include this is not just because it's porn and that's kind of crazy, but that it does reflect something, right? It's a social medium that reflects larger trends, I think, and that's kind of what I think the psychologist here is picking up on. But to return to the Olympics, there was an uptick in search around like Olympics and Olympians, and an uptick in searches for French porn. So
the cultural influence of France
again,
has reverberations across social media.
Dr. Lori Batito, the psychologist, says Summer Olympics and anything that is front and center in our culture will be on our minds and therefore tends to be sexualized. So again, there is a sort of marker here.
Very, very true words.
So I'll skip some of the more graphic things, but they did also have a 2024 election sort of report of some kind. And we've seen this in all the other year in reviews, where there is basically, when there's a big event, there's a drop in Pornhub traffic. So you see a general
decrease.
Yes.
In the Trump debate
so during
with
the
Harris.
election, but actually it's the opposite. So during the election day, you see an uptick during the day and then a drop in the evening. So a 7% uptick during the day and
seems a lot.
And a 16% drop in the evening after 6 p.m. when the exit polls start coming in. But they even break this down by minute, and they show that in the lead up to a Trump rally, there is a decrease in traffic by about 15 to 20%. And then after the Trump speech, there's a 16% spike in
So how do you
traffic.
interpret these dips?
That people are watching the Trump speech.
Yeah.
And they're not going to Pornhub. But it's always, what's interesting is there's always this sort of corrective nature to it, right? So if there's a big event and people are not on Pornhub, then they overcompensate for that afterwards.
Yeah, but I wanted just to comment that the French put a pretty good show in terms of their, tradition as being associated with sexual liberties and, historical more laissez-faire attitude during their promo of the Olympics. So I think that may also reflect in trends search-wise on this particular platform.
Yeah, so that's it for the platform year in review.
Not much. That's the conclusion.
Not much politics-wise, but it is.
But not much. How about X?
No report. If I didn't mention it, I couldn't find the report. If you find one, please let me know. But yeah, WhatsApp, all these different.
There's just no data.
just no data. It's not a thing as it was, but it's interesting. I mean, I think even though I'm reading it and reporting it from there's not so much there in terms of politics. I mean, do go check out the TikTok and different ones. Pinterest predicts, because it's interesting because these platforms have such rich data internally, right? And so whatever they give us is sort of it can be a little bit strategic in terms of trying to sell us stuff or get us to buy products on the platform in terms of their advertising services. But they are probably doing that because that's the best thing they can offer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Also interesting absences. Blue sky. Nothing. This is where I'm thinking more about politics, like X or maybe now blue sky.
But I think to the big picture is that the question of how is the platform just dealing with politics? How is it approaching politics when we've seen civil unrest, when we've seen so much election interference? I mean, I think that is kind of working in the background and affecting these reports, which is, I'm sure, at one of these platforms, there's been a discussion. Should we talk about what happened in the US election? Because that was definitely a talked about topic. And they're probably like, no, let's write about book talk. Let's write about the Olympics, right? This is much more
Which
neutral.
are probably accurate trends, not to dismiss them, but not as overtly political as we would like, because we like Paul Kahn.
Right. So that's it. That's the gift.
That was the shortest year in review of this part, like notably short.
We are, passing, I don't know how, after editing, but we are at 50 minutes.
Really?
Luckily, I can definitely say my second gift is a short one, but do not feel constrained, please.
No, I have actually a pretty long one to begin
Let's
with.
go.
Are we ready?
Let's go.
Ready for my first gift or the second gift of the program. And I try to summarize it as election interference, but it's a very rich content that I'm going to use a particular event to illustrate, but it's not about the event itself, but what it tells us about politics in general. So in contrast with Michael's rather, unglamorous political bend on all these reviews, mine is really the hot politics. And my theme, to summarize, is how social media can break or make an election.
Ooh, the $1 million question.
The $1 million question. And in this case, it is a make or break or make, because in this order, right? What I'm going to exemplify this trend is something that happened very recently. So it is a current event almost at the time of recording, but it's something that illustrates a bigger trend. And I refer to previous instances to try to paint it into this wider context. But the actual event is the annulment by the Romanian Constitutional Court of the first round of Romania's presidential elections on the basis of foreign interference in the political campaign leading to the presidential elections. And to my knowledge, again, audience can correct me, but to my knowledge, this is the very first time election results are annulled and the election process is bound to be redone from ground zero next year because of the role of social media, a social media event.
So just to recap, the election results were basically null and void. Everyone voted, but we're not taking the results.
No, exactly. This is it. This is pretty radical. And this is what I just said. Like, maybe the companies don't want to talk about it, but it doesn't mean that politics doesn't take place there or it's not really hot and controversial. What happened is that in Romania on the 24th of November, so this is very, very recently, there were presidential elections. Romania has a very similar system to France, a semi-presidential republic in which the presidential candidates have to have more than 50%. And if they don't make this 50%, then the top two candidates will fight each other out in a second round. The fact that generated this brouhaha is that a candidate that in the opinion polls was polling around 3, 4, 5% ended up winning the first place with 23% of the vote. This candidate was known by no one before, was not an active political figure, not a leader of any political movement or party or any kind of...
Was this Georgescu?
Georgescu, Călin Georgescu, who literally came out of nowhere to win the first presidential election round, and the party in power, the Social Democrats, not making it to the second round. So this is really an upsetting of every hierarchy in Romanian politics ever, really, and a super surprising turn of events, which led to a lot of self-investigation.
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on? Obviously, the voters ask themselves the same thing as the state institutions. And I'm going to recount the events and then interpret them so that everyone is kind of on the same page without following a too close chronology. But on the 24th of November, this election took place. The next day, we have the results. Everyone is amazed. How come this person that nobody knew became so popular? That a quarter of the voters actually supported his agenda. Then some week, I believe, afterwards, we have the release of an otherwise secret document bundle from a combined National Security Council meeting in which the Minister of Internal Affairs, the Minister of Defense, and the equivalent of CIA and FBI, but for Romania, saying for the global audience, all met with the current president. They discussed, and the president decided to declassify, make public these documents. And the revelation in these professional services investigations were mind-blowing. And this is what pertains to social media. Of course, there are lots of things in there that are more general politics, but what we have seen is quite impressive numbers. We have seen that the primary platform that generated a lot of traction for this particular candidate was TikTok. The candidate, according to the campaign finance rules, had to declare whether they proposed any political ads or not. The person declared 0 lei, which is the Romanian currency, in funds for any public ad, which is again a striking. Zero money was spent on promoting these candidates.
0 digital ad spend.
Yeah. Which also kind of raises some form of alarm signs because other people, other candidates that did not make it to the second round spent quite a bit of money. And I'm checking my notes here. The Social Democrats candidate, who was expected to be the one to make it into the second round, spent more than 53 million lei, which if you double that by 4, you get the euros.
Yeah.
Oh, you divided this by 4. Yeah.
So still 15 million euros or something.
It's a fair amount of money. And then the person that came in the second place spent 17 million lei, which again divided by 4 would still give you millions of euros of funds spent to promote themselves across social media and regular media. And this particular candidate that was an independent, not connected to any political party at the time, spent $0 and got into the first place. So you can immediately see there is a little bit of a tension there. What did the secret police and all these other actors say? Well, they realized that in a post-factum move, when investigating him, they realized that 25,000 accounts on TikTok have worked together to amplify the message connected to this candidate. 25,000. Which is, again, a pretty fair amount. Then we have some other numbers, something that 100 influencers promoted him explicitly or implicitly by using the hashtag that did not contain his name, but his political slogan. And these 100 influencers, they had a followership, a cumulative followership of 8 million people, which is, again, a fair amount.
So what is that, 8 million divided by 100?
Well, they had 800,000 or 80,000. Again, it's uneven, but it's a lot of people basically. Romania has a population, a voting population about 10 million. So if you reach 8 million, that's a pretty fair amount. And then we have also seen that from these reports that were released after the presidential round, that a certain person, a Romanian citizen who otherwise was not politically committed in any way, not a member of a political party, just kind of a regular Joe, spent 1 million euro in sponsoring ads connected to Călin Georgescu's campaign. So Călin Georgescu did not himself spend any money,
But
but this
some
particular
average
person,
Joe with $1 million to spend on
I
political
think
ads.
we're almost like in a Hollywood movie scenario here, right? Further research identified connections between TikTok, where a lot of these amplifying behavior was connected, where these influencers were active. So this TikTok activity was coordinated by another platform, which leads me to this kind of cross-platform specialization rather than imitation. So it's not just like platforms are locations where you have a backup for your main operation, but you can also specialize. And TikTok activity was trained or prepared on Telegram.
So how does that work?
So on Telegram, accounts that were later involved in the Romanian campaign were started already in 2022, so 2 years prior. And these accounts, these channels rather, were basically informing the TikTok accounts what to do. The equivalent of being on a mail list of a campaign and receiving instructions, now you should go and write something with the hashtag vote XXX, right?
So Telegram was the seed platform.
Exactly.
I think that is, we've seen that in the context of formal campaigns. Like it can be, I'm thinking of like some German major political parties where they would just, hey, here's, the CDU, I think it was, don't quote me on that, but other parties as well. Like here's our meme, we share it on Telegram, and then you go out and share it. It was that kind of flow.
It's exactly this flow. Telegram provided the instructions, and the TikTok influencers and later to be seen bot networks reproduced exactly the instructions that were made through these Telegram channels. So there were two different functions of these media platforms.
Because maybe I spoil the plot here, and again, I don't know.
That's a surprise element.
But of course, who are the people that are willing to take the instructions from the Telegram channels for a candidate who is an obscure candidate?
And what's your answer to this?
I mean, there is not, like in the last episode of the podcast, it was all about how do you get influencers who are having their own audience to talk about politics because they want to do some change in the world, which is kind of what we like to see in a democracy. Who might be the people who are promoting a candidate without so much of a knowledge of that candidate?
People who are in for the money. I can say that Romanian influencers, actually, TikTok Romanian influencers, the 100 ones that were mentioned in the report, basically went public and did a proper mea culpa with public statements saying, I regret so deeply being connected. I regret not being informed about the candidate and their platform. I was paid to reproduce the hashtag for dignity into the future, which was the candidate's own tagline. And I never bothered to dig deeper into this. This was just a contract as I do with any other brand. And I just did it. The message seemed to me not toxic, dignity, future, why not? And I'm not a partisan myself. And
probably not so involved in politics.
Probably not so involved in politics. A lot of male influencers as well. But a lot of these 100 top people came out and say like, honestly, I did it for the money. And I am responsible for promoting a message that I actually don't support. Some of these influencers said that they actually voted for the candidate because they believed in the brief they've been given.
Yeah, it sounded good.
Some others said that they actually did not vote at all. They're exactly as you were saying, not interested in politics. This was a contract that they would do with any other brand.
And who's the mastermind?
Who's the mastermind? Let's think. Well, it's only one interested party in this, and that's Russia. And we don't have to second guess either. So it's not about like, oh, maybe, who knows? The Romanian secret services have identified exactly the same tropes, the same message in the Telegram case, exactly the same networks that were active in promoting similar messages in the elections of Moldova, which took place a couple of weeks before the Romanian elections, the presidential elections in Moldova, where the country's European future was at stake, and where the incumbent, Maria Sandu, won by a very tight majority, 52.7%, towards the pro-Russian, pro-peace so-called candidate. So the Russian, how can I say, fingerprint was very obvious. Even more so, the same message of promoting this idea of peace and cooperation, and let's not fight with each other, but, let's have these people, the West and the East, basically over our heads. We should just keep a low profile, don't get involved into it. We just focus on our nation, our brave and proud nation. This message was exactly the same, interestingly, as the message pushed by Russia before its invasion of Ukraine in late 2021, early 2022. So they believe that this particular message is something that resonates with the populations of these countries, something that emphasizes the dangers and the casualties of war, the dangers of nuclear war, and the idea that we should not be outwards oriented, but let's focus on the inside.
Fear, demobilization, classic.
And a lot of pride.
I wonder, I have lots of thoughts. I'll try to keep them short, but on the one hand, we have heard through the years on this show about the polling and science behind campaign messaging and testing and iterating, optimizing, all that stuff. Or basically, you want to know what message works before you actually pay someone to do it, whether that's a candidate or an influencer. And so I wonder if, on the one hand, there's the cultural uniqueness of these different countries, but then also that's the fact that there's the same message. Like, are the Russians or, other sort of bad actors, are they really running like hardcore swayable type beta tests to see that this works and then putting money behind it? Or are they going on like KGB Sixth Sense stuff?
If this, imagine you're a candidate in any country. Yeah. You're nobody, Călin Georgescu being a case in point. So you're no one. You could be anywhere, right? And then suddenly, using this type of sophisticated campaigning tactics to a public that is receptive, let me also add, you basically can almost win, in this case, an election.
Which I guess...
Isn't that amazing page from a playbook
which
to
completely,
copy?
Nullifies my point, because regardless of how the science behind it that message was crafted, if it was science or not, the end result is a natural field experiment.
Yeah.
Right? It shows that you can, through various mediators, get that message out.
This is where my points that are more general beyond this particular, though very interesting case can be made. One is the influence of TikTok. And that's why I was curious about what they would say about themselves. Truly, TikTok, interesting for us, doesn't allow explicit political advertisement compared to the Meta concern, which allows them but regulates them, right? TikTok says we are not getting into politics, so we're not promoting any party, any candidate. The ads or these hashtags that were hinting at this candidate's message but were not explicitly connected to him or to his account were categorized by TikTok, according to these secret reports, as entertainment. So
falsely amplified.
And falsely amplified, because they were influencers that already had an established audience, produced content about a variety of things that were not connected to politics prior to this campaign, and did not have any explicit markers about politics to them. The name of the candidate was not mentioned. There was no particular patriotic or political display of symbols or anything. It was more a simple message like, I think we should think about values and dignity and proud to be Romanian, this type of stuff, which you could call it entertainment, I guess, but definitely is not part of a political campaign, according to TikTok, right? And this is where the discussion came. How come, first of all, the Romanian secret services could not get this, that there are millions of dollars, euros, ruble involved in this process? And two, how come TikTok did not get this awareness? And this is where the plot thickens a little bit, because on the basis of these reports, the European Commission activated itself and asked TikTok to say, what is this? is this election interference or not? And TikTok was then transparent and responded to the European Commission by saying that 60 million impressions were generated by the accounts that amplified the pro-Călin Georgescu message. 60 million impressions is a pretty solid number. But they weren't. My point is that the TikTok did not volunteer this information, and when at various stages the various election authorities in Romania, I'm not going to bother you with all the names, but various institutions in Romania tried to address this thing with TikTok, both prior to the election and in the aftermath of this surprising result. TikTok refused to engage with any of these Romanian authorities, and only when the European Commission summoned them, basically, they produce any kind of response, because obviously they're afraid of being banned from the EU as they're cooking to be banned in the US.
Yeah. So lots of thoughts here. One is, oh God, where do I begin? First of all, I think, it's crazy. This is maybe the first example, probably the first example of, and even though it was a sort of runoff kind of election, first stage, that has been reversed or
exactly.
restated.
This is why I thought it was mentioning as an empirical case.
Yeah, it doesn't get a lot of media play. Why? Who knows? Romania is always kind of off the radar for whatever reason. So it's a bit shocking when you put it that way, right?
Yeah.
That there was an election that was ran and is now actually being redone because of all this. I wonder if, like I said in the Meta report, they did talk about the 39 Russian bots or Russian coordinated inauthentic behavior networks that they took down that also have this cross-platform strategy. I wonder if that counts in the 39. When you talked about an unnamed candidate that came out of nowhere to win, strange, but also with social media, not so crazy. Think of Macron. And the whole idea of we've talked about this outside the podcast with these, what was the term? The digital startup parties, or like the idea that parties are easier to form in certain systems. So it's not so crazy, right? But if there's also this sort of machinery behind it, then
which has been tracked. It's not just a speculation, right?
It's the inauthentic, the coordinated part. And it also makes me think about how in the last episode, when we were talking about influencers, there was this difference between Harris and Trump in terms of wanting to actually pay for the dollar trail or the lei trail in the Romanian case. Whereas Kamala Harris, the campaign explicitly would not pay influencers, but tried to give them some kind of, meet the candidate type of thing. Whereas Trump was much more like, we'll pay for the message. And this is exactly a case where that link in campaign finance becomes very, very important.
And I think it's very interesting. Romanian campaign finance laws explicitly prohibit the payment of ads for anyone by non-Romanian actors. It is, and this is actually, I think, I would claim, even on the pod, as an official rule for a majority of the democracy that I'm familiar with. So you are not allowed as a foreign country to be involved in another country's elections, even if you're a member of the European Union. So even if France wanted to support a candidate, they couldn't pay for it. Yeah. Right.
And it's you do have to in the US upload your passport and stuff like that. But I forgot maybe the biggest point that this makes me think about is I don't know what the exact word is, but the global realignment of powers, right? You mentioned that there are many Romanian agencies that came to TikTok, and TikTok owned by ByteDance, Chinese, and this kind of idea of the new polarity of West and East that maybe, again, this is getting a little bit tinfoil hat, but maybe there is some Chinese-Russian coordination.
I think definitely TikTok
at the level of ownership,
from what I gather, without going maybe as far as you're speculating, I think definitely TikTok is not enough regulated. Meta is so much of a behemoth, is so established that they need to be reporting everything. And the reports that you presented earlier on testify to their need to kind of show up for themselves. They have an ad library, TikTok basically tries to escape this path by saying we're not doing politics. But then here we are today with an election entirely annulled on the basis of social media campaigning and breaking finance laws, right? So I think basically TikTok begs itself to be regulated. And this particular instance is just fodder for the advocates of those who want to regulate this particular platform, saying that it's toxic, saying that it provides a platform for voices that are, undemocratic and breaking the law beyond everything. Beyond, in a sense, the Romanian case is a clear case where you are not interpreting the meaning of content, but you are simply looking at how you can demonstrate the breaking of campaign finance law. What is interesting, final detail perhaps worth noting here, is that the people involved in this campaign really tried to cover their trails. They did not use the same IP address, so non-shared IP addresses, in order to not detect in a simpler way.
Which is what the Meta report was kind of getting at, right? That they have these multiple presences.
So exactly, this is more, let's call it an upgrade, a more sophisticated way of doing bot interference. The payment is in a very complicated network. I cannot even reproduce it for the sake of this episode now because it's not very clear, but it goes via South Africa, Romania, South Africa, Russia, very complicated, in order again to not have clear-cutted connections between a Romanian political candidate and payment that comes from outside the country. And it also shows the level of interest from other European Union member states in this type of vulnerability, I would call it. Apparently, from reading the media reports around this, both Germany and France, whom are facing an election in 2025, they are very interested in following up with TikTok and following up all the investigation around this Romanian example, because they are very much afraid of their own vulnerabilities.
I will only say that maybe TikTok's slogan of the year was correct. A little creativity sparks a lot of impact.
This is actually a very good way to wrap it up. And I'll stop here just in the interest of time. But yes, I think it's a good example.
It is super interesting. And I think definitely should have gotten more, or maybe will get more play.
It will get more play because the new elections will be in March or April of next year, pretty much in the same time zone as the German elections and as the probably elections in France, where we have a complete deadlock at the moment. And probably around June, we'll have new elections in France too.
But I will use this to transition into my gift, because I think there's an interesting sort of, maybe not a very positive dichotomy, where while this essentially election results being canceled has not received so much media coverage, what has been the great exodus and the battle between, are people leaving X to go to Blue Sky and
Exodus.
Yeah, Exodus. I saw that one, and I think it's The Guardian or someone that I take that from. But my gift, I have titled it "The Battle Over Text."
It's all about battles this year.
It's Castle Core.
Yeah.
And essentially something going on with X, Blue Sky, Threads, Substack, which is essentially all around the vacuum of Twitter, or the great exodus. And so this idea
like
X.
Yeah. I'm slow. Yeah. I'm slow to visualize. Sorry.
No, it works better in text, which leads very well into this gift, because it's just something I've been thinking about in terms of multimedia. Of course, we have Instagram and TikTok as the big heavyweights on video, as well as Twitch and various streams. But the vacuum created by Twitter creates a vacuum of what is the platform where text is dominant. And this is something I think, if we connect to the history of the internet and politics.
Oh, this goes back a while.
Politics is debated in text, right? Going back to Usenet, the idea of Howard Dean and Netroots using online communities, forums, basically. How do you discuss politics? Like, it's very hard to do. I mean, of course, podcasting is one medium where you can go back and forth, but you need long form and you need text I think, to do that. So as we've seen the larger social media ecosystem move towards video and live streaming, where was kind of text-only posts most normal? Twitter.
Yeah.
Maybe LinkedIn, but mostly Twitter. And now it's X, and now people are leaving X, and there's been a lot of coverage, which I think is disproportionate to importance when it comes to election results in major European democracies, that there's an obsession about people leaving X after the election to protest its sort of alternative media status. So that's one kind of thing. And then another aspect that got me interested in this is I run with my students every year. What social media platforms are you active on? And I have a list of like 30 of them. I also have a lot of Asian students. So we have Douban and the little red book. I'm not going to try to say it in Chinese version of Instagram, whatever. And then if they don't see the platforms that they use regularly, to fill one in. So there's a little open text box. And one person from my class this year wrote in Threads. I was like, oh yeah, Threads exists. I forgot about that. So there's something going on where the vacuum of users leaving Twitter, there's a battle for what is the text platform going to be? Is it going to be X? Is it going to be Blue Sky? Is it going to be Threads? Or is it going to be even Substack coming in with this kind of different model?
Substack.
So
that's another good one.
I just thought to go through a little bit of data collected here on Threads. So currently, I've seen these estimates vary, right? But apparently Threads has a strong user base of 275 million users because they were able to integrate with Instagram. But of course, that's not active users, right? So I've seen it's around 30 million monthly active users. But in terms of the average time that users spend on the app, at least on Android, the number is 34 minutes a month, which is very low.
That's not huge.
X users, in comparison, spend about 5 hours and 19 minutes on the X Android app.
Per month?
Per month.
That sounds also a little bit low.
But still, much higher than...
That's the average, though.
Right.
We should remember this.
The average TikTok user also uses TikTok 60 times longer than the average Threads user. So getting people to actually use the platform for longer is a key challenge for Threads. But some internal data from Threads itself does show that more than half, or 63% of all Threads posts, are text only. So this idea that like people are bleeding from X and going to Threads, it's like, well, what is this platform actually? What is Blue Sky? We've basically seen that Blue Sky users shot up just from October 1,000%, from 250,000 to 2.7 million. And the idea with Blue Sky, I've never used it, but it apparently offers more customization in terms of like you can choose different algorithms, you can create your own feeds for different things. And what I want to also mention before I sort of bring this back is that there is also, Threads is part of a growing movement called the Fediverse. Have you heard of this?
Only the name.
It's an ecosystem of interoperable services. So it's like the way that they describe it in Meta's company blog is it's like email. Like if I use Gmail and you use Hotmail or some other...
Hotmail.
Then we can still send emails to each other, right?
Yeah.
The servers are interoperable. So what I think Threads is trying to do is it's trying to join this kind of up and coming tech movement called the Fediverse, which is like, even if I'm on Threads, I can follow someone who's on a different platform in the Fediverse and they can see my messages and I can see theirs. And so I think that's a way that they're trying to increase that time spent on the app by opening it up and making it more interoperable with a growing number of other of services. But the point that I want to bring it back to is that it's all about where will the text conversation be if X becomes more of this alternative media system that other people in potentially other Fediverse partners don't want to engage with.
Whew, these are very big questions.
So let me, just to round it out in the interest of time, then there's also Substack, which is also a text-only, or I guess you can put videos and images in the essentially the newsletters, right?
Yeah.
So you can subscribe to people's
or blogs.
Or blogs, and I think
it's a combo of both.
Right, which Twitter being the original microblog, like we're coming back to the blog. And so whereas Threads has really had this challenge of how does it deal with politics, right? Because if it wants to take over X is now highly political. It should be a place where political text-only posts happen, but then that works against Meta's overarching mission. So they have this kind of tough balance. Substack, on the other hand, actively leaned into politics. And this is actually very interesting. So they even hired a person, I don't have their name here, with the intent of being essentially like a political initiative lead to make 2024 the Substack election. And their company has wrote openly in their official newsroom blog about leaning into politics, calling out that the business model of social media doesn't work for political content in the sense that it prioritizes like sensationalist over deep rational thought. And Substack's model, by contrast, shows that it can reward those who build readers' trust and attention as a long-term relationship. But what's fascinating, I think, is that when they want to position themselves as a political platform, it's almost like a seed platform that people with interesting and original political thoughts will publish them on Substack, and then cable news channels, public radio stations, YouTubers, and podcasts will source their information from Substack and amplify it.
This is a kind of old-style social media way.
Yeah, and that politicians and interest groups will look to Substack writers to help make their own case for their policy initiatives. So you have a lot of things going on with Substack really investing in resources to make it a political platform, but not so much that like it wants to hit 300 million people, but that it will be the seed platform for discussions that these other business models will amplify through other ways, which is all getting to the point of the gift, which is about who will be the dominant platform for text, because there is some, since the beginning, connection between text and politics that seems to be basically not having its demand met.
I think it's a subgroup, right? We were talking in earlier minutes of this episode about Instagram and TikTok, which are purely visual or great majority visual. Of course, even on Instagram and TikTok, you still have text. Almost everything is texted, but you still have a primarily like a visual cue or a visual clue as to what it is you're talking about. And I'm actually, again, because we haven't talked so much about these gifts to each other, I'm now reasoning in real time whether I do believe what you're claiming, that politics is best discussed in text. Some part of me agrees and thinks about forums like Reddit, which also, again, we see maybe as going a little bit more carefully because they're publicly owned now, or they're traded and they are interested in making money. So they don't want to bring too much controversy to themselves. But I think also the medium of podcasting, this excluded where we are, it can be very leaning into politics quite heavily. And we do see, for example, in the US elections, quite a big role played by these independent podcasters like Rogan, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting because I want to pick up on Reddit there. There is a difference between the splintering of messengers, which would be, like you could say, podcasters on the right, for example. And then there's the medium, which is it tech, and here I mean multimedia, is it text, image, video? These are different things. And what I was thinking about, and it's just a reflection, I don't super believe this, but it's something to think about, is are we seeing a sort of political splintering where the right wing is dominating text as a medium? For example, through X to 4chan, which is an image board, but is also quite long form conversations. And I thought that Reddit would also fill it. Like Reddit would be sort of right leaning, but it turns out that I'm wrong.
I thought Reddit is left.
There's a study that came out, I think, from a researcher at the University of Michigan that found on average users were left-wing with a score of 58 out of 100. So if 50 is neutral, it's slightly left. Moderators, slightly more left-wing, so the average moderator was 62. And what they found is that they could actually give each user a rating, and they could study that comments were more likely to be taken down if the moderator and the commenter's ideologies clashed, even in sort of non-political fora. So I just think that it's interesting to think about when I see this, where is Blue Sky going, and whatever, even Mastodon. It's
Mastodon.
To me, it's about who is the king of text, and Threads is fighting for that. But how are they going to do that without a political element?
Well, I must say, I don't have up-to-date numbers because we don't have data, which is another message this podcast hammers home every time it's aired, right? But I think the proportion of explicitly political content on any platform, in any medium, being video, text, audio, whatever, is very small. 10 to 15%. So I don't think people in general are very concerned with explicit politics. But of course, politics being a thing that reflects on the values and behaviors that are beyond elections and candidates, but are about life itself, in a sense. Everything is political, and I am a political science graduate, and I will insist on this point. So you can read the politics into almost anything, from the text of R&B songs to the videos by Japanese high schoolers' dances, whatever. You can read. There's a political element in that as well. But in terms of explicit politics, I don't think people are particularly hot on that around the world. I think because politics has become increasingly contentious, influencing conversations around the Thanksgiving table or Christmas table, as we're probably prepping to, and so on. Conversations that are in disagreement. Also because, unfortunately, we live in a time with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of conflict. So gone are the days of the end of history, 90s to early 2000s. Today we have several hot wars, the war in Ukraine, the conflict between Israel and Hamas and other neighbors at this point in the Middle East. We have Russia that basically acts, as we previously documented, as a rogue actor in various elections. We have the fall of the Syria regime, just as we speak, and probably many others. The impeachment of the South Korean president, or about. Sudan, Congo. It's a world where conflicts and politically anchored conflicts are very much present. So I think a lot of people look to social media as some form of, let's call it, refuge or escape area. I don't think that politics is necessarily explicitly making a comeback in text or visual. But of course, there'll always be the political heads, and they would want to discuss with like-minded. And I think, in a sense, the forum format is a very good format for this type of endeavor. So I think 4chan or Reddit would be better platforms than others. Maybe Threads. Again, I'm not a user of Threads, and I'm not familiar with their interface, and that may explain why I made this comment. But maybe Threads or X or Blue Sky or Mastodon they don't provide the interface that is conducive to this kind of discussions. But for me, this kind of the exodus, as you called it, is not a texodus, like in a sense that people are not running away from text. They are running away to another text, be it Blue Sky or whatever. I just have to have one more comment. This idea of fragmentation by political lines. This is one which is beyond text, but maybe in the case of video platforms, because they are so universally palatable, there is not so much of a platform fragmentation, and within the platform you have your own influence, your own ecosystems, like more left or more right or more topic sensitive. Whereas in the case of text, because they're more high cognitive demand platforms, maybe what we are witnessing is exactly this political alignment of platforms, just as we used to have in the old Hallin and Mancini media systems, where we have different ways to organize the relationship between media and politics. Maybe this is where the degree of maturity of social media that we see today also asks us for this kind of alignment, in which maybe some people that are having very strong views about politics will not feel comfortable to be on some platform as opposed to others. And then there'll be a middle ground that are not politically committed.
Digital parallelism. Someone go ahead and write that paper. But
we serve this topic today.
So I think, I just had some reflections on text. And
this would be a nice segue into mine. My last gift, second and last, to all the viewers listeners, apropos text, who are still here. And mine is also having its starting point in a recent event, but generates some deeper thoughts, hopefully, about social media and politics more generally. And the recent event that generated my interest in this is the ban from Australia on social media platforms access for people younger than 16.
The teen ban.
The teen ban. This is interesting and talked about because it's the most radical attempt to regulate social media access for a population based on age. Just a bit of background, I'm sure that the people listening at the moment will know, but just for the setup. And the setup comes from the current Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who is coming from a center-left social democratic background, and proposes a way to reduce the mental health or general health hazards that social media is supposedly having on young people. Interestingly, this initiative is supported by a wide, like 2/3 of the parent population in Australia.
Yeah, getting 66% of
any government. Regardless of how popular or unpopular a certain government is, getting 66 on anything is great. And this particular move is supported by both Labour and the Conservative Party in the Australian setting. And it's obviously a way for the Prime Minister to gain some political points, but it's also a way for Australia to signal leadership in regulating social media. And this is reflected on something that Albanese officially said. The whole world is watching, he said.
Yeah, they're so clearly trying to be the next kind of EU, right? So they did have this battle with the charging for news publishers and whatnot.
I'm not going to talk about that in the interest of time, but of course, Australia has a past in trying to regulate social media platforms. This particular new law is quite interesting because of the price tag that it carries. Because if it turns out that under 16s end up having a social media account, it is the platforms, and that's what I think is interesting, it is the platforms that are responsible and can be fined up to $32 million. Which is a very spicy.
But it's peanuts for that.
Well, this is for one.
Oh, for one case.
Yeah. So if you're adding up, if this is a mass behavior, then you're in for some cumulative fees. This is, of course, a big issue for social media companies. Of course, the problem is, there are several problems. First of all, this could be what we can call, in political science terms, a populist move. The public is concerned, and so the politicians try to deliver to win some points. And as I think it's pretty clear that we lack this complete evidence saying that social media does harm more than good to a population of any kind or to young people. We had the Frances Haugen, revelations from Facebook. We also have some other research from health communication that emphasizes there are populations at risk and that indeed you can connect certain bad behaviors among teenagers in particular.
Harassment,
Bullying, even suicides, unfortunately, something that was a trend popularized on TikTok, our company of the hour, by the number of times we mentioned it on this podcast. But the evidence isn't there. 100%. It could be either way. And I think we have colleagues in our environment at Lund University that also do research on healthcom who say that social media can actually be used for good, for solving mental health problems, for getting people more socialized, for addressing eating disorders and other things, right? So the evidence is shaky. Nevertheless, Australia goes ahead and tries to ban it. And what I've been reading about this is that it's a question of like, is this going to remain a populist marker rather than an actually implemented ban? Because there are several challenges. One is the definition of social media, and this basically hints to our conversation before.
Who is included?
Who is included?
Yeah. Which, by the way, because I'm a little bit familiar with the case. I've been following it. I mean, it's these questions are they're so important. I think it supports your argument about this being a strategic political maneuver, right? Like let's go after social media companies, and then the first question is, well, how do you define social media? Well, I haven't thought that far. We just have 66% of the population that wants to do something
about it, right?
So I think it reinforces that.
And I think it's very interesting, and tying it in as I'm trying to do, and because again, hearing all the platform reports. Gaming platforms, they're not social media. So Twitch or Discord, which you named in your report at the beginning of this episode, are basically not considered social media. YouTube is going to explicitly be exempted from the law because it is believed, and I think it's actually ridiculous, me as a scientist say that many people think that it has an overweight of educational content. Eyebrows are raised very high at this statement because research on YouTube also points out to the so-called rabbit hole of radicalization and how to make a bomb videos, right? Which are on the same platform. But according to the Australian legislators, YouTube will be not regulated. So you could be a young person under 16 and still have a YouTube account. But TikTok is named, Snapchat is named, and surprisingly, Reddit is named. Again, controversial perhaps. So what is a social medium is not entirely discussed, and I think this will definitely delay the implementation of this law. And then on top of that, as if that wouldn't be, complicated enough, we have what we call technical challenges, like how to do it. According to the Australian law, it is the responsibility of the tech companies themselves to implement this because they are the ones responsible ultimately for the damage done to the young people by exposing them to this nocive content. However, there are two big discussions. One is that the social media companies don't want to do that and have actually asked the app
Android and Apple Store.
Android and Apple app
Google Play,
consolidators to be the ones to verify this.
Of course.
So you couldn't download an app.
Which, from their side, is a good argument for that because they take a third of the payment for apps.
Exactly. And this is exactly the point, that when downloading an app, you have to have a phone or another console where you need to register. You cannot just download it on Ether. Having a phone also gives you some form of information about the owner of the phone and all sorts of things that are embedded in your Android or Apple operative system. But the problem is that neither Google neither Android or Apple, I should say, want to be these gatekeepers because they themselves don't feel that they are under the law reach, right?
Right, because they're something different.
There's something different. You can download all sorts of apps that are not social.
I think if you follow the logical path of this, it would be like you need to pay like, $1 a year to have a social media, which WhatsApp played around with that model for revenue. But I think what that would entail is that you have a bank account or a credit card, and you would get that around the age of 16, 17, 18.
Currently, the limit, do you know? What is the official social media limit? What's the age? Across, it's global. The social
13.
media. 13, indeed.
Ding, ding.
Very good, very good. Earning points there. However, an NGO that monitors this particular behavior says that up to 25% of accounts across platforms, and probably on some platforms more than others, are for people under this age limit.
Of course. And then, of course, you're pushing the platforms to police the ages when there's no incentive for them to report to governments how many people under 16 are using their platform.
Also, because the social media definition is very unclear, to say in a polite way, it basically skews the market.
Yeah.
YouTube is allowed, but TikTok, which is the equivalent,
that's
is
literally
bad.
as someone who cares about concepts and definitions, it's terrible, and I think there is something to the political strategy side of this. Lost my train of thought on. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
Well, I wanted to supplement. Maybe that would kick you kick your thoughts in the right direction. Is that there's also this law is a very, how can I say, like negative law, because it starts with the assumption that social media are bad for you and that we have to help you helping yourself, staying away from their addictive design. However, there's also the positive aspects of social media, this type of digital socializations, this type of introvert platform where people who are uncomfortable with speaking in front of crowds can actually find like-minded. So this has some very unintended consequences, I think, and it's very interesting to see whether other countries will follow suit or will just sit and watch how Australia's ban will play out. Final point is that, in a sense, this could even give social media platforms even more power by giving them more data. Into this technical challenge category, what I have read about as a solution that's circulated by people outside this environment, so not social media themselves, is Face ID and using AI to date the age of a user. Beyond the capacities of an AI to properly identify the age of a user, which is a discussion for another episode, the very idea that you have to scan your face in this way, basically giving not only to your operative system, but to a social media company, something that is uniquely identifiable as you, gives them even more data that by law they're not obliged to share. So they are going to get even more information about users without transparency, without regulation of the content on the platform. Basically, they get a free pass at using or fine-tuning their models even further without getting the transparency or how to say the checks and balances, accountability in place. And without giving the people maybe what they were looking for, this kind of social media environment, which is not toxic.
I think at the end of the day, this breaks down. So I remember what I was going to say, which is like Australia. I know they're trying to kind of be the next EU in this, but I'm just looking up their population figures. They're 26.5 million. The EU is threatening because it's 500 mil, and it's a complicated institutional structure, but it has teeth. I think. Nothing against the Australian government, but I do feel a need to attack it because of the inconsistencies we've just pointed out here. Like, good luck, Australian government, beating these highly, highly competent tech platforms with brilliant staff. Governments are always at a disadvantage to tech when it comes to, like, you want to lash out against tech is going to beat you at your own game.
I was thinking that you're going to say that who's going to be the ones to prove the Australian government wrong are actually the young people who are going to be basically trying to circumvent.
Of course they are. Of course they are. But like when you mention this idea of AI data, of course the platforms are going to they're going to do a cost, a sort of cost calculation. Is it worth it to operate in Australia or not? And that was the fight that was with the news platform. And then so they'll either pull out, Or they will figure out a way to, which is interesting because you mentioned there is maybe can Australia build a consortium of nations that would do this? Even still, the tech companies, they're going to beat them at running the numbers. They're going to beat them at what we have to remember, and I think this is lost, is that these companies can change the services that they provide are not stable environments. They can reprogram things, they can move, they can adjust, and they can deploy updates very, very fast. They have the staff and the infrastructure to do it. And so they are just so much more flexible than government institutions. And regardless of like how they check whether someone's 16 or not, they will go into this at an advantage that the Australian government or any government is like fighting with one hand behind. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Like you're going against a M1 Abrams tank. Don't do that.
I think the only thing that is relevant here is the idea of a precedent. Of course, Australia's small market size doesn't make them even relevant for any of these meta or this kind of class giants, social media giants, to engage with it, right? It's like, okay, well, in the worst case scenario, we're just going to leave and see how Australians will manage to get hold of our products. But it's interesting whether this is indeed stimulating the discussion in other countries. I don't believe that in the EU such a discussion has taken place, even though, of course, there's been some issues connected to TikTok, specifically, see my earlier point on the election interference. I think the idea overall is that we shouldn't prevent people from using social media, but we should make this social media cleaner, this is my term, or more hospitable environments rather than these toxic, hostile environments where all sorts of bad behaviors are rewarded.
And it's not just that. And to link back to this idea of the science informing the decision, I mean, I think something that I'm very interested in and am sort of convinced by without seeing the evidence is the idea that young developing brains using TikTok changes their neuroplasticity. Like it affects how your brain is forming because of the short feedback and the attention. And linking that to the idea that these platforms change so quickly, like if a study is able to pin down that viewing TikTok for 2 hours or more per day has a fundamental altering on brain development, by the time that study is out, the platform has changed. So it's very hard to make regulation, and the platforms are certainly hyper aware of this, and they can remove those systems and those features to anticipate regulation.
Well, that would be then a welcome thing. If, for example, they can identify, and this is where maybe I'm a little bit more skeptical than you, if a platform, any platform can identify the type of content that is harmful, for example, for the mental health of a young person, or their self-image, or stuff along the lines of why this ban was introduced, then they should implement that straight away. There's no need to give a premium to this sensationalist or popular but ultimately harmful content.
Unless it goes hand in hand with profit. And I think that's where,
of course,
that's where there is
there's a tension.
I don't think it would never be that clean, that all the ills of social media are the profit drivers, but there is some overlap there. And so I do think, even though I've been just playing devil's advocate here, I think it's an interesting and noble point from the Australian government. But I think when you start picking winners and losers, like it's going to be very, very difficult to have some type of democratic legitimacy. Of course, the politicians can attack, but I think if they don't have a good robust argument, people are going to see through that. And that's going to make it more of a democratic legitimacy problem of we've elected these representatives to do that. They did a terrible job. Good luck.
I have to comment two things. One of it, which is particular to this one, is maybe, wrapping up to something like a bigger perspective on social media and politics, right? The smaller thing is that I find it problematic that the parents need the government to intervene.
Yeah, that's true.
You see what I mean? Like, if you're a parent and you have a problem that a 12-year-old or 13-year-old are spending too much time on social media, then isn't this part also of your responsibility as a parent?
Yeah, it is, definitely.
Like this could be one. And then the bigger point can be for us as researchers, right? How can we, if somebody can legislate, like in this case, on very poor evidence, what is our role in the society? We're asked always to contribute to the society in all our research project applications, in our research projects that are doing. We're asked to deliver evidence on which policy can be made. But in this case, there's no evidence and policy is still being made. So I feel a little bit disheartened that...
There's evidence, but it's so scattershot and it's so hard to find a through line with this because it depends on so many other factors. Platform X may have, and I don't mean that in terms of XX,
Yeah.
Platform Y may have this effect, Platform Z may have this effect, but it's going to vary based on offline economic, cultural factors. Is going to depend on just so many factors that it's hard to pin down. It's the social media that is doing this to everyone. And I think that's a problem that, and I think especially journalists have struggled with that reporting as well.
The only thing we can ascertain, starting from the example I gave, is that indeed social media can affect elections. And this is maybe where the political aspect, rather than this general mental health or people behavior aspect, can be more strictly monitored, and where more access to data would be a good thing to have.
Yeah, we need more research, and it's we're facing headwinds. But yeah, we are crossing the 2-hour mark.
Is it? Time flies. We're talking about something you enjoy.
We once again, as a tradition that is unplanned, we actively try to make it shorter every year, but we failed again. But interesting conversations, interesting thoughts, I think.
I think so too. I hope the listeners who have portioned this listen, or they have traveled across many seas, will enjoy this discussion, and maybe they want to contribute their thoughts or feedback.
Absolutely. Always happy to receive feedback and emails. I think it's a good point. One of the ideas behind doing a little bit of a longer episode is that the idea is that people will be either traveling somewhere over the holidays or sitting at home over the holidays. And so hopefully, if you made it this far, that it wasn't a chore to do so, but you were genuinely interested in the topics and conversation. One thing I will close out on is that I already have recorded the next episode, which will be out, I think, January 5th.
Wow, you begin the year well.
Yes, on digital media metaphors, which is fascinating. I'll talk more about it at that episode, but we've mentioned many of these metaphors from toxic to rabbit hole to platform. And what do we imply, or what are the risks of using these terms that we use in some sense out of necessity? But yeah, interesting ideas about the language that we describe these phenomenon. Are there disadvantages to that? And I think it's a convincing argument. So an exciting episode, but do you have any concluding thoughts on the year that you'd like to?
Concluding, this has been a pretty dire year in terms of the politics of things, with many conflicts as mentioned. And I want to think of social media as a space where we don't necessarily reproduce these conflicts, but that is a space where we can reason and analyze these events in our lives and help us make better and more informed decisions, including in politics.
Yeah, it's just one of these things where it's just the social media has become such a part of the social, such an inseparable part of life, and politics is part of that. And it's with that, and then the fragmentation and all the legislation and everything, it's confusing, but
that's why some people bail out and basically don't partake into this wide feast of platforms and so on, and retreat to some areas of familiarity. It can be whatever the platform they joined on. I think that will be an interesting phenomenon to study, right? That too much of an offering, too much of a selection is actually depreciating consumption. And we see that from other products as well. But let's see if this will continue to happen on social media. And then the other thing, maybe to venture a prediction, right, is that we will continue to see more regulation. Like according to this trend set by the Australian government, we might see more attempts to rein in, hopefully on the basis of some evidence at least, the behavior of social media platforms, probably TikTok being the first.
Let's see, 2025, and we'll reconnect for the 10th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review. But I think, yeah, that's a good place to wrap it down. So Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten, thanks so much for taking the time out, bringing a couple gifts, and reflecting, speculating on the year in review.
See you in 2025, and Merry Christmas.